I'm John Clippinger. I'm a research scientist at the Media Lab here in Sandy Pentland's group. I also co-founder with Sandy of something called ID Cubed, which is a nonprofit that's developing open source software for the sharing of data, mobile data, and also creating trust frameworks that people can build applications on top of. I would like to talk very briefly about something very close to my heart, and it's called trust frameworks. And trust frameworks for mobile devices, not just mobile phones, but a whole plethora of mobile devices, including sensor devices. We are moving into a world, a new kind of data ecology. It's very, very different than anything we've seen before. This is a picture from Hieronymus Bosch in the 14th or 15th century. And you can see that they're strange creatures. It's unlike anything that was before. This is the sort of a new kind of an ecology environment we're moving into and working in. Hence, we have to think about it very differently. So we're creating infinite amounts of data through different kinds of sensors. We're immersed in data. We're just not collecting data about things. We're actually collecting data we need to drive new kinds of processes. So we have medical data. We have data that monitors our taking of medicine. We have data that's monitoring phones and where people go. We're having data that is used for driving cars, self-driving cars. So it's a totally different world than it's ever been before, and it's changing faster and faster. People are trying to take control over the personal data. So there's this one hand of all this data being created, and another sense, how do I collect it? How do I analyze it? How do I make it mine? How do I make it new kinds of services, new kind of applications that can come out of it? So there's something called a quantified self movement, that it represents many, many people thinking about how they can collect data on their own activities, their own health, and share that and have better experiences, better health outcomes, et cetera, like that. There are things like download my data, where I can collect data, blue button, I can collect medical data about myself. I can collect data on the use of electricity in my home. Again, the idea is to find a collection point to give people control over it and develop new kind of apps. So we're living in a world when things are increasingly becoming networked and self-aware, what I call sentient. And so you have the ability to take data off your mobile phone and send and monitor the sensors. There's a project here called FUMF that was developed at a platform for taking sensor information, GPS information, accelerometer, Bluetooth information, and making predictions about what people would do. This is very powerful stuff. It's also very creepy stuff. And the question is, how do you balance the value that comes out of that without being creepy? And one of the things that we think about is if people have control over it, and there's a principled way of sharing it, e.g. having trust frameworks, you provide a new kind of what Sandy calls a new deal in data, a new way of thinking about it. And that entails having to have new kind of regulatory frameworks, new kind of rules, because when you have data analytics, when you have the ability to machine learning, you're actually creating new kinds of processes that are dramatically forcing people to rethink about what kind of applications and services are possible, and the fact that the machine itself is getting self-aware. So you'll see here a whole new set of regulations that are coming off, and trying to think about a new paradigm where people have control over data. You have data with a consumer bill of rights that's come out of the White House. In the EU, you have a sense of a bill of rights on people on the control of their personal data. And the idea of trust frameworks has come out through something called NSTIC, National Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. So there's rethinking of a lot of the policy frameworks, but there are real challenges in how to do that and implement it in the technology. Because in a sense, the next generation of phones are phones that are collecting information about you. It's not just a smartphone, it's a sentient phone. There's sensors on the phone that are being used to improve the experience, but again, that becomes creepy if you do not feel that you have some control over the data itself. So we talk about something like called a social stack. As more and more you're developing new kinds of services that are inherently social, and so you have to think about people's identity and who has control over identity. And you have to be able to federate and pull data together, and then how to share data in a principled way. So we talk about trust frameworks in social networks and ways of having permitted sharing of that data. So there's something we call a trusted compute cell, which every person would have. They spin up, and it takes their personal data and pushes it into a cloud, and then puts like a trust wrapper around it. It has its own virtual machine that creates the basis for having trusted sharing of data in networks of networks. So it's not concentrated into a single silo. This we think is very important. There's a notion of people being self-sovereign in the sense they should be their own identity provider. They should be their own password, in a sense, so you can use biometrics to do that. So this is an example of some work that we're doing in creating a trusted compute framework, what we call trust framework. So each person could have their own way of collecting data about themselves, pushing it in the cloud, and then defining their own social networks that represent their ways of thinking about it. So they're not captive to a Facebook, they're not captive to a Google, and it's very explicit what the rules are for how to share that data. And those rules themselves could conform to different kind of regulations in different jurisdictions. So one of the ideas, the primary ideas, and I'll leave on this notion, is this idea of people being self-sovereign. It sounds like an extreme notion, but the idea is that you can monitor the data on your phone and do the analytics on your phone to develop a signature that's yours. And you can use that to authenticate. That becomes your password. And that becomes the way you can share data. So it's not something that's controlled by a bank. It's not even controlled by a country. It's basically something that's your own. And so this is a new way of thinking about how to create a new ecology, a new way of sharing data among people that allows not only the sharing of data, but new kind of applications and services development.